translating from text to writing.
That's really neat.
Okay, folks, we're ready to start again.
Oh, was it in there?
I'm timing you to get to your seats now. Change of a shift. I'm spelling George at this, and I just noticed looking at the program that I'm going to have to introduce myself twice. So as long as I remember who I am, I'll be okay. Our next speaker is Betsy Kellums, who is a historian, historical preservationist, works for the city of Greeley, and she's going to address the parallels and connections between the city of Greeley and its founding and Deerfield. And I've seen her slides, and this is really interesting. These two charismatic characters who form these two communities out here on the plains. Betsy.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for the honor and the privilege of coming and speaking. I actually had very little to no knowledge, very, very little knowledge of Deerfield before this. So it's been a lot of fun and a different research project than I've done in the past while working for Greeley, so it's been lots of fun. Greeley and Deerfield both began as colonies by hardy pioneers willing to suffer and fight to establish independent communities on Colorado's eastern plains. While founded on similar ideals, very different results came out of these colonies. These are just some of the significant themes and parallels that I found when reading about Deerfield and knowing some information about Greeley. They both arose out of the pioneer colony movement that kind of characterized the development of the American West. They, during the late 19th and early 20th century, agriculture was obviously one of the main foundations for each community. And the arid eastern plains of Colorado and transportation are some of the key parallels between the two. Now, before I go any further, obviously pioneer is one of the main words that comes to mind when thinking about Deerfield, because O.T. Jackson was clearly a pioneer in going out there and establishing a community for blacks, for their opportunity to govern themselves in a way, and to prove to the rest of the world that they were able to do that. Nathan Meeker also was a pioneer. They both came to the areas where they developed and kind of got in the trenches, so to speak, and were the first in their areas to settle and establish communities. The town of Greeley was named for the main financial sponsor behind the establishment, Horace Greeley. He was also a very well-known figure, having been a politician and the editor of the New York Tribune. Deerfield got its name from a comment made by Dr. J.H.P. Westbrook at a meeting in June 1909, where he said, and I'll read the quote, "We plan to make this our home. These are to be our fields, and because they are ours, and because we expect and hope to develop them and make them into substantial homes, they will be very dear to us. So why not incorporate that sentiment in the name we select and call our colony Deerfield?" The beginnings of Deerfield and Greeley were not drastically different either. Although Deerfield was obviously 40 years later, Greeley was founded in 1870 and Deerfield in 1910. They were both in the context of the Industrial Revolution, which was really happening more in the major cities and farther east. So it was not happening so much on the Colorado Plains. And they both began from scratch by hardy pioneers. Nathan Meeker was inspired by Francois-Marie Charles Fourier, who lived in the late 18th and early to mid-19th century. He was a reformer who advocated for planned, small, agriculturally based communities, which he called phalanxes. And he was also inspired by his past experience at the Trumbull Phalanx in Ohio, which failed. He learned from that and made some changes as he was developing his plans for a colony out west. He also attached himself, as I said before, to a famous person, Horace Greeley, who supported the colony in town. And that turned out to be critical for the establishment and success of Greeley. O.T. Jackson was a very educated man with a vision, who had a vision of self-supporting black community that returned to the land. He saw it as the only opportunity for African Americans to be free, self-sustaining, and self-governing. He had worked, and for many of the years of the colony, he worked for governors as a messenger in their offices. And so during the week, he was in Denver working for the governors, so his wife was often left to run the town. He had written a letter to help promote the town and attract people to come to it. And he said that his purpose was, quote, to establish a municipality owned and controlled by colored people, to prove that we can control, govern, and administer as a part of the state government the same as other people. He was inspired by Booker T. Washington in his book, Up From Slavery. As you know, Booker T. Washington was one of the most, if not the most prominent black people during the time. He was an author, educator, and reformer, but he did not support O.T. Jackson's endeavors. However, O.T. Jackson, being a prominent black man at the time, was supported and encouraged and assisted by Governor John Shafroth, whose office he was working in. He helped him find the location for the colony and supported the efforts. The state normal school president in Greeley, President Zacharias Snyder, who was president of the normal school from 1891 to 1915, also supported the establishment of Deerfield. Now just a word on some of the commonalities between the two. They were both responses. An opportunity to get away, to establish a new community. They were led by adventurous and determined people, and Deerfield also was in response to rejection. One of the things that helped drive O.T. Jackson to go into politics was when he went to the land office, he was not helped because he was black. So he decided he was going to help himself and go into politics and work. So he got into working as a messenger in the governor's office. They both emphasized agriculture as needed for survival, and they both promoted their communities through written media and through their connection to important leaders. Here's just a little comparison. The thing with trying to compare Greeley and Deerfield is, obviously Greeley was well established. Even when it started, 480 people is a pretty sizable population compared to, and we have the statistics for Greeley. Deerfield, on the other hand, the first statistics that we have for population is in the number of families. So it's a little bit hard to do graphs comparing the two, but here you have a few figures. There were 7 families in Deerfield by the first year in 1911, and just a few other facts about cultivation. I'm not totally sure about the 2,500 acres in 1917. I did see that somewhere in print, but I've also heard that, and I'm sure you're aware, some of the early research isn't entirely accurate. So, and in World War I, 5 Deerfield men served, and I could not find a figure for Greeley for World War I, but I'm certain that men from Greeley did serve. Meeker started a joint stock colonization company known as the Union Colony to found a town in the western U.S. And he had very specific criteria for the people that were invited to join the company. They had to have money, they had to have conservative values, and just a note about the money, the failed Trumbull phalanx in Ohio, part of the reason it failed was because not everybody who joined it to establish it had money. And so poverty actually was a little bit one of the problems with the establishment of it and getting roots. So he knew it was important to, when starting the community, that everybody who joined had to have some amount of money. They had to have conservative values, agreeing with his, in the areas of temperance, religion, education, cooperation, agriculture, irrigation, and family, and a strong work ethic to be able to become members of the company. O.T. Jackson created the Deerfield Agency, a company to found an agricultural town on the plains of eastern Colorado. he invited African Americans, and he promoted it, and the colonists had to be colored, and they had to agree with his ideas about agriculture, and that returning to the land would provide freedom for their race. He also indicated in a letter to an author, there was an author, Mr. W.J. Harsha in Kremlin, had written an article about Deerfield for a publication called The Southern Workman. And he, in this article, he provided a lot of information and some pictures, which you'll see in this presentation. And apparently this article led to the establishment of other African American colonies around the country. As I said, they were both pioneers. They got in the trenches and they started and built communities with basically starting from scratch with nothing. O.T. Jackson filed this plat in 1914 showing the town lots and the agricultural fields with the Weld County Clerk and Recorder several years after he founded the town of Greeley. It reflects his belief in the community as a permanent, successful community on the plains of Colorado. Similarly, in 1870, when Nathan Meeker founded Greeley, one of the things that he did to show his confidence that it would be a firm, established, and successful community was that he built his house, which is now at 1324 9th Avenue, and is considered kind of in the center of town now. At the time he built his house, it was about a mile from town. Cooperation was one of the things I mentioned that Nathan Meeker founded Greeley on. And it was also one of the things that was essential for Deerfield as well. Jackson, as quoted from a 1915 Denver Western Farm Life article about Deerfield, indicated, "In 1906, I started out to find a location that would accommodate about 200 colored families in a solid body, my idea being that we would cooperate and help each other." And obviously they had to cooperate because some people had things that other people needed, and so they shared and got along quite nicely. They also cooperated with the white farmers that lived nearby. Now, both communities were founded near rivers. Greeley was founded kind of at the confluence of the South Platte and Poudre rivers, and obviously agriculture was a major, agriculture and irrigation were major factors in Greeley's success. And Greeley, they were able to irrigate. They dug the ditches as soon as they founded the community. However, Deerfield, agriculture was essential for the success, but since they couldn't irrigate, they didn't have the technology, and they were at least a mile from the South Platte River. They didn't have the technology or the financial resources to irrigate, and so they used dry land farming methods, which I believe Rob talked about earlier, which are dependent on the rain. And as Peggy was talking about with the wet and dry cycles, when Deerfield was founded, they were in a wet cycle, so it worked for a while. However, the years of drought that followed the wet cycle obviously had a major impact. And in their farming, they had established the Deerfield Farmers Association, which was a group that met monthly, and it also met with some of the agricultural experts of the State Agricultural College and the county superintendent. And they also sent delegates to the Farmers Congress that met in Greeley and Fort Collins. That helped them in their establishment and their farming methods. Mr. Jackson wrote about this in a letter to Mr. Harsha. He also wrote about the women in the settlement. And I'm just going to read a couple of quotes about things that he said. Quote, "The women of the settlement are of an estimable class and are very industrious. Many of them could not resist the temptation of 30 cents per hour to work in the fields this summer, and could be seen early and late going to and from the nearby farms. Their help was very much appreciated by their husbands and white farmers, since their men could not be had." And another quote, "I never could have accomplished what has been done in the establishment of the settlement in town had it not been for my wife, who sacrifices untiring labor and patience to stay in the settlement and assist in encouraging and holding the people together." As I mentioned, he was in Denver a lot during the establishment of the town. And on a parallel note, Nathan Meeker's wife had a very important part in Greeley's development in the early years, and obviously after he was killed in the massacre in 1878, she continued to live in Greeley for a long time. In concluding the letter to Mr. Harsha, Jackson had a comment about farming in Colorado. Quote, "I am in a position to know that any man, colored or white, coming to Colorado to make it his home, if honest and industrious, will receive the full support of the officials and citizens of the state. Colorado lands and opportunities offer the best inducements of any state in the Union for the poor farmer." Just kind of a mid-presentation summary. Both communities were built from nothing. They needed water. They were based on agriculture, and they had little to no resources when they were begun. And lumber was shipped from other locations. Nathan Meeker didn't want to use lumber, so he built his house out of adobe. O.T. Jackson, on the other hand, did use wood for his house, and obviously it's still standing in Deerfield today. Jackson's friend J.M. Thomas, who is pictured in this picture, was the first to join the colony. He had worked on a wrecking crew demolishing an old building in Denver. And for those of you who know me, I don't like talking about demolishing buildings, but this was obviously in the early 1900s. So here's just a few pictures of Deerfield from Harsha's article that he wrote for the Southern Workman. This was again the article that prompted other African American communities to sprout up around the country, according to Jackson. And I'm not sure exactly how he knew that or why he said that. The Dust Bowl had a major impact on Deerfield, as you all know. Greeley continued to grow and build and irrigate. In spite of the Dust Bowl, the irrigation played a major role in the success of Greeley during the time. And it also prompted the leaders to begin planning the Colorado Big Thompson project to ensure there would be water available during the dry cycles. And the Dust Bowl strongly impacted Deerfield since their agriculture depended on rain and their ability to use stored water. Just a couple of other pictures from the museum from Deerfield. Now, I was just talking to Bob before my presentation, and he said George Osborne's son was here earlier, and I'm very sorry that I missed that because I had contacted him and asked if I could use a picture, or I wanted to ask if I could use a picture of his father. I've read that people described his father, George Osborne, as being ageless. He didn't look like he was as old as he was, and he lived to be 96, and shared his wisdom, was very friendly, and continued working at a hard labor, full-time job up into his 80s. He was born in 1876 to his parents had been slaves. He moved to Deerfield in 1917 and then farmed, and then later moved to Greeley in 1925, where he worked for Montgomery Ward in Greeley, and then later operated a one-truck trash removal business. And he also had farmed in other locations before he moved to Greeley permanently. He died in Greeley in 1972 at the age of 96 at Weld County General Hospital. An article about his 80th birthday in the Tribune described him as follows. George, as he is known to hundreds of men, women, and children in Greeley, takes time out from his work dozens of times a day to glad hand the people he meets. He considers everybody his friend, and most of them are. And then he had his 95th birthday. He had a party with the faculty and students at Jefferson School, which was is in the neighborhood where he lived over what is now the Sunrise neighborhood in Greeley. And at this birthday party, he gave some of his very astute wisdom. Quote, "It behooves all of us to do the very best we can with our life." Thomas May Russell lived in Deerfield. He had known Jackson since 1920 and lived in Deerfield when he he was one of the people who signed O.T. Jackson's will in 1947. And then he lived in Greeley at the time of O.T. Jackson's death in 1948. Oh, and what happened 64 years ago today?
Was it past?
O.T. Jackson died.
Yes. Today, O.T. Jackson died
Celebrating.
64 years ago. O.T. Jackson's niece, Jenny S. Jackson, came to Greeley, or to Deerfield in 1914 to visit. I'm not sure how long she was here at that point. She left and lived in Chicago, worked as a laundress, and then later moved to Los Angeles, where she worked as a maid and for White House Coffee. She returned to Deerfield in 1943 to take care of her Uncle Oliver. And she stayed in Deerfield until 1953, when she moved to Greeley part-time. She kept a residence out in Deerfield, and then lived in Greeley full-time for the last 9 years of her life. And here's a picture of her out at Deerfield. Here's just a picture of her gravestone at Lynn Grove Cemetery. And this kind of gravestone was used either for people who were poor or as a temporary marker. So I don't know if that, I'm not sure the reason for this being her gravestone. Transportation was one of the other huge ties between Greeley and Deerfield. Obviously Highway 34. When Highway 34 paving was completed, there was a celebration at Deerfield, and it included state and local officials from Greeley and Fort Morgan, etc. And there were musicians. O.T. Jackson was still there, and he was on hand to welcome the guests. And my understanding is that he served a lot of refreshments and made a killing. The significance of Highway 34 also kind of went along the tourist route. It put Greeley and Deerfield also really as potential destinations, and that was part of the goal of the city of Greeley in using that position on Highway 34. Jackson also wanted to make Deerfield into a resort community. So I'm going to rush because I got the warning a little late. Greeley was, in a lot of the research I found in describing the location of Deerfield, it was often described as being 25 miles southeast of Greeley. So because Greeley is a very prominent community in the county, it's kind of the point for locating Deerfield. O.T. Jackson got building supplies from Greeley. There's a receipt showing from 1925 that he purchased $41 of supplies for a church. And then he purchased insurance from the Weld County Abstract and Investment Company in Greeley in 1945 for the buildings in Deerfield. The Greeley Tribune covered events that were held at Deerfield, including a Labor Day picnic, and then of course the 1931 celebration, as well as covering it earlier than that as well. As Peggy said, O.T. Jackson's attorney was in Greeley. Obviously they went to Greeley for the doctor. There was a doctor in Deerfield, however, by the time of O.T. Jackson's illness, he had to go to Greeley. Now just a couple of final thoughts. Deerfield was certainly a success for a time, as they did live, govern, and farm for a time in their own self-sufficient community, which I believe was O.T. Jackson's goal. The Dust Bowl, however, ended the farming community of Deerfield, as Peggy mentioned. It wasn't an unusual thing in the area, though. There were other communities that had the same impact. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Was there a fee to join the community of Deerfield like there was with Newton?
Oh, yes, there was a fee. I think most of the fee was for the land, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what the fee was. It wasn't a very big fee, though. Sorry, I'm sorry, I don't remember the amount. Are there any other questions?
Thank you. Just a quick comment while we're changing slides or presentations. Jenny Jackson's it's not a tombstone, it's a marker, was, and we don't know exactly why a tombstone wasn't erected, but my guess is that there's no one around to do it. And I do know that the Northeast Colorado Heritage Society which is newly formed in Greeley, they have some brochures over at the display area, has taken on one of their projects to raise money to put a tombstone on Jenny's grave. So if anyone's interested in that, it's certainly a worthy donation as far as that's concerned. Our next speaker, we're going to get into the archaeology for a couple of presentations now, is Dr. Andy Creekmore. And you may or may not be surprised to know that the sum of Deerfield is not what's on the surface, it's what may be below the surface, what is below the surface. And we have ways of finding it. And that's what Andy's going to talk to you about.
Oh, okay. So I have to turn around to see where I am. Oh, hi. Friends in the audience. Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers. I know there's a lot more organizers than I realized, but especially Bob Brunswick and George June for reeling me into the Deerfield fold. I feel like seeing the presentations today, they're kind of echoing Mr. Jackson's call to come to Deerfield. Come to Deerfield. It's kind of interesting, that whole parallel there. I'd like to also thank the people involved in the research I did. Bob Brunswick, UNC students Christy Coast and Jonathan Oldmueller. Jonathan's brother Andy volunteered his time. Eleanor Mosman, my wife, always helping out. Heidi Short, a community volunteer from Boulder. And Michael Rogers, who loaned us a magnetometer. This project began by Bob mentioning this project to me, and I'm interested in applying geophysics methods to sites in the region as part of my own methodological interest in getting students involved in these methods, and it seemed like Deerfield would be an excellent place to try this out. So what I want to recount here over the next few minutes is what we did and what we found and some questions it raised about Deerfield and our preservation of the site. Okay, what were the goals of this project in a nutshell? First of all, I want to evaluate the applicability of magnetometry to this site. Magnetometry is one of a range of geophysics techniques. These are techniques that measure the physical properties of soils and buried things. Other techniques include ground-penetrating radar, conductivity, resistivity. Each measures different properties of soils and buried materials, and some are more or less effective at different sites. Magnetometry is a common first approach because it's relatively fast. You can walk above the ground surface and get a rapid assessment. It's also useful at historic sites because it's really good at finding metal things, which is both a pro and a con, potentially. So that was one thing we're interested in doing. And on top of that, trying to investigate some features of archaeological interest at the site. This is a map of where we worked. I know you've seen lots of maps today. Some of them are getting hopefully locked in the brain there, but just to orient us, this is a close-up. Route 34 is just above here. So we're looking up is north, Route 34 is just here. If you go to the Deerfield site today, turn off the highway, you run into the historic marker right about there in this open space. And we selected a few areas to test. This is a very large space. So we've selected a few different places we thought might have unknown buried remains in addition to known remains. These include number 1 here, the schoolhouse, 2 grids there, 60 by 35 meter area total. I put the question mark there because it seems that some of the uses of these spaces and our understanding of them is evolving as people conduct more research. We have places such as the barn, pavilion, dance hall. Like there's multi-use spaces, which makes sense, right? And some of these, in this area 1 and 2, we have some concrete foundations on the surface that have been varyingly referred to as schoolhouse or possibly church, possibly other structures. So we're still figuring some of that out. The second area here, the second area is 2 grids here, 40 by 40 meters here. This area was selected kind of judgmentally across the street, diagonally from the O.T. Jackson house, we have a large sort of scooped out depression, and we kind of were guessing maybe there was a house foundation sitting on this. A little bit of a jump there. And then down here, area 5, this is a 20 by 20 meter area just north of the granary. And we had some historic photos, most of which, as Bob has pointed out, somewhat frustratingly are really close-ups. So you see somebody in the porch or in a field, and you don't have reference markers to figure out where are they in space, and so we're trying to figure that out. But there was one photo that suggested there might be a sort of storage shed or privy somewhere in this area between the granary and the O.T. Jackson house. So we're taking a stab at that. Let's see, what else? Just a word about the methodology. What exactly is it that we're up to? Magnetometry is an interesting method. It's a passive method. It doesn't emit any signals or anything like that. It works in a very complex way, but similar to your compass. If you take your basic compass out and that needle points north, that needle is feeling the pull of the Earth's magnetic field, basically. And magnetometers are sensing that same thing. In this case, we used a total field magnetometer, which is responding to the pull of the Earth's magnetic field, north, south, east, west, and to the core. Now, the magic of the magnetometer is, through various technical capabilities, it is able to be very sensitive to the local magnetic field. We used a Geometrix G858, very space age machine, optically pumped cesium magnetometer, which is not radioactive, although when you take this overseas, you have to label it like metal detector just so nobody gets freaked out. It's not radioactive. It basically has a cesium gas in these little chambers in the sensor, and optically pumped means you just expose it to light energy. It excites all the electrons, and it makes them highly sensitive to the pull of the magnetic field right then and there. And that's really significant because, to some degree, all buried soils have some susceptibility, like your compass is susceptible to the pull of that magnetic field. The iron oxides and things in soils have a weak, very weak attraction. But humans do things to enhance that attraction. If we start fires and heat things up, it makes that local strength of the susceptibility to the magnetic field much stronger. If we concentrate organic garbage and refuse, which we do, for various reasons, ranging from bacteria that digest things and spit out more magnetic things. Also, we scrape and move stuff around, right? We dig holes, we build roads, we trample, compact things. All that takes the natural susceptibility to the Earth's field and concentrates it or eliminates it or moves it around, right? And so the magnetometer can pick up these very subtle variations, and in ideal situations you can see whole plans of what's beneath the ground. Other situations you get sort of subtle indicators. In other situations, as you'll see today, you get sort of ambiguous information, and you need to think some more about it. The methodology we used, basically you go out there as if you are a human scanner. You scan the surface. You walk back and forth in a measured grid along what we call transects at some spacing, right, between your spacing, between your transects. And as you're doing that, these sensors are going, they're doing their thing, and they're collecting data points. And then you assemble those like you would assemble a photo that you scanned. And the resolution of that photo, or the resolution of that image, is simply a function of how close together you're taking samples and so forth. And so to interpret the data, you can make graphs, or more commonly, we take those numbers, and it literally is its numbers. It's like, how strong is this, how strong is it? You have these numbers, and you turn them into pictures that you can then look at to visualize the variation in the magnetic field. So that's what we're going to look at. So that you see some of the sampling information. Here's some general views of the areas we surveyed. First, the, again, schoolhouse, question mark. What you see here is the cement foundations here. In the background is the embankment of 34. Some folks were asking me about how to get to Deerfield. You drive some distance, and then you see a little sign, slam on the brakes, and hit down this hill. So, who's done that? I've done that. Even when you know it's there, you still sort of like get lulled to sleep by the road, and suddenly you're like, so here we have these standing foundations. Quite interesting. I was curious to know if the cement had any kind of iron rebar or something like that in it. That's one thing that magnetometers, they're really sensitive. They're not like your metal detector. They work very differently. You don't use a magnetometer to find a penny. That said, if there's a chunk of metal out there, it's going to shine like the sun and drown out all around it. This is a real challenge at Deerfield. So we surveyed all around this, hoping to see, is there any trash pits? Is there a privy, meaning that question the school child asks, where do they go to the bathroom? Usually outdoors somewhere, or as we all know, the temporary indoor thing goes outdoors. Anyway, the repository for that, it's a pit in the ground, and it fills with garbage and other things. And in terms of researching their past, finding artifacts to learn about them, that could be a kind of time capsule, much like a well. People tend to drop things into wells or throw things into wells. Abandoned wells become trash receptacles. Privies are, in many ways, receptacles. And that can give them a different magnetic signature than just undisturbed soils around them. So here's a general view, and there we are collecting data there. This is the second area, the depression, so-called. Very difficult to photograph. This word's depression are in the middle of it, and this is kind of the edge of it. And so we surveyed kind of a good space around that in case this is a house or something like that. Here we are, sort of work in progress. You carry this rather awkward contraption that sort of gives you spinal problems. And to help you get a correct sampling, we use ropes as guides. So you're not sort of wandering freely, and these ropes kind of give you a rough direct trajectory, so you're collecting data in some consistent fashion. Here's some more of that. Notice this is Heidi here. You have sort of a team, so people that help move these rope guides, people that help you, in this case, this is a kind of a, this magnetometer is more difficult to carry than others, help you strap on the apparatus, so forth. Here's the granary, north of the granary, we're looking here. A lot of debris here, mysterious house on wheels, and this is quite fascinating. The Squire's house is surrounded by this locust thicket that is really, I mean, it's like out of the movies. If you want to get in there, you've got to put on your armor, which is the best preservation. Perhaps we should plant this thicket all over the whole site, but then we couldn't get to it. But it would protect it from invaders. So here we see the O.T. Jackson house. So we're just south of that here. Okay, so here's some of that survey in progress. Let's get on to some of the results of this. So here we're looking at these images created from data points. And what we're seeing here, I'm not sure which one to point at. I've got three options. I'll point at this one. You're seeing the schoolhouse foundations, which show up as they should. Interestingly, no metal in them as far as I can tell. If there was rebar or something, it would be shining like, it would be like these bright points. However, there's a lot of other modern metal. So here's our foundations, which we already knew about. Notice this right here. These are in the scale of strength. The blue is stronger, really dark. Well, it's not on the scale here, but the black means it's off the scale positive, like strong magnetic field, and this yellow is negative, and you get this dipolar, this positive negative when you hit something really metal. This actually, I think, is a ceiling fan somewhere in this vicinity, which unfortunately there's a lot of debris at the site that's not of the Deerfield period. However, amidst this clutter of some of these modern things, you have a lot of these little blips, and these are essentially some kind of ferrous objects, small objects, most likely. These are not going to be, their shape and size is not what you'd expect of a privy or something like this. These are small objects, their value tells us that. What's interesting about that is we have not ground truthed this. What are those objects? Are those historic period objects? Are those more modern materials? In this particular area, the data does not show any appreciable evidence for subsurface features of any kind, like pits or things. This is our middle area, the depression area, as it were. A different view here in which the high values, you can see their height indicates their value, and the low values sort of little sinkholes, and in between the kind of generalized background. This area has quite a few of these ferrous spikes, but again, no obvious coherent large things, like nothing I would interpret as a pit or a well or anything buried beneath the ground. Here's another view of this, and you can actually see just in the variation in the topography can cause variation in the magnetic values. And here we see the perimeter of the depression, some of these metal objects through the depression, and some scattered here out at some edge. And some of this variation in color has to do with the Earth's magnetic field sort of shifting its values over the course of the day. And then we have north of the granary, interestingly enough, relatively quiet area, pretty much homogeneous. That means the values are very similar, with the exception of that that corner, which is barbed wire fencing. This was a kind of an unfortunate discovery. I mean, it's not bad, it's just that right where we think the privy is, there's now the remains of the fence corner, which is a bunch of railroad ties wrapped in barbed wire, buried in the ground. Not the kind of thing you just kind of move out of the way for a minute. It's required like a backhoe to move that thing. So what that does is it gives you this really strong positive magnetic signal that drowns out any subtle signal that you could get from a privy or something like that. So what do these results mean? They look really pretty, but what do they mean? Here's another view of that. You see the bright blue area, and a few other blips nearby are the barbed wire fencing. What does this mean for this methodology at the site? What have we learned? What have we figured out? Well, first of all, we identified some known features. That's always good. If you're using a method that doesn't see what you can see, that tells you something. We can see what we can see with our naked eyes. Number two, we identified a lot of Ferris anomalies, which is just a fancy way to say we found metal stuff, metal objects, metal materials. But that's, got to be technical in the literature, right? It's ferrous material. It's basically you're hedging your bets. You don't want to commit to any particular type of material, iron, steel, what have you. Ferrous anomalies, and this brings up the challenge of metal debris at the site. What do you do with the metal debris at a site such as this? The metal debris, on the one hand, can really be an avenue towards understanding use of space at the site, right? On the one hand, we're trying to find house sites so that we can preserve them in a range of open spaces. We have to select some, perhaps, to invest our energies in. We're trying to find, perhaps, garbage or debris left over that we could possibly excavate, as Bob's going to talk about, that might help us learn something about the inhabitants and their lifeways that were not mentioned in the historic records and so forth. So metal material can tell us a lot about the site. At the same time, it can interfere with the more subtle information that might point to some features that we want to see, like a pit, a trash pit, or a excavated, filled-in well, or something like this. I personally recommend that we basically do a surface foot survey and magnetometer surveys in which we mark and remove those items that are not of the period. And it might seem funny to mark them, but one of the very interesting questions from an archaeological perspective is what happens to the life histories of sites, not just at their fluorescence, but after they're abandoned. And you see some of the photographs today from the 70s, 80s, 90s. Deerfield is an active site, even though technically it's not inhabited the heart of the town. It's an active site. Things are going on. Buildings are falling down. One building disappeared. We don't know where it went. About 20 years ago was a photo of it, and now it's not there. So documenting even the ceiling fan, Lord help us, could be an interesting part of thinking about the life history of the site, and could point to questions of heritage management and how we would like to manage the site going forward. Often people recommend cleaning up sites because garbage attracts garbage. But you also want to be careful that in your zealousness to clean up, you don't remove information that's of the period as well. So that's an issue this raises. Challenge of low contrast features. If you've seen the soil information earlier, the sandy soils, one of the challenge of them is they're very homogeneous in many ways. If you dig a hole and fill it in, you can't necessarily tell where that hole was, if that makes sense. And one of the things that contributes to to better results with geophysics methods are differences in compactions of soils. And if you have a soil that's well draining and very homogeneous, you don't get those contrasts when people move the soil around as well. And so probably many of the features are going to be what we call low contrast features, unless they have that ferrous material, which any garbage pile is going to have a lot of metal in it from this period. So it could be that some of these quiet results we're finding are the needle in the haystack effect. When you look at that downtown plot and you see those streets, that doesn't mean there was a house on every corner, right? That's what O.T. Jackson, when he was to come, people to space, and a lot of people did come, but there were a lot of open spaces. And so one thing we hope to do with future applications of magnetometry and other methods is survey large areas, and hopefully within that we'll begin to see the concentrations of debris that might mark a house site that's missing. And one of the challenges of these house sites, you look at the photographs of them, often it's a wooden house on a concrete block. And so when the house is gone and scavenged, and the concrete block is gone and scavenged, what evidence remains of the house on the surface, or the barn, or what have you? Very little, if anything. And that's when you want to resort to some geophysics methods that might pick up the nails that fell off of the shingles right, that would be discoverable, would concentrate in an area where the house once was, or other subsurface test trenches and things that have been done in the past could pick those things up that today are just not visible there. So this also raises the need for this issue of ground truthing, which basically means digging some selected holes or investigating the surface. And that's something else we have to do very judgmentally, balancing the need for preservation and conservation, as well as learning more about the past. We have to make careful choices about what we do, where we do, and how we do it. And finally, the need for multiple methods. We hope going forward to apply different geophysics methods, and the strengths and weaknesses of each of those may complement one another and provide us a clearer picture of what's beneath the surface Deerfield. So thank you very much for your time, and hope to meet all of you at the next break.
We're just getting started on the archaeology at Deerfield, and it's an enormous area. And as Andy said, a rather large portion of the lots that were sold out there were never occupied. And so we don't have, at least at this point, we don't have a nice aerial photograph of Deerfield that was taken in 1922. I would like to have one, if anybody's got one in your closet. And when we do have pictures of buildings, we have pictures of buildings where the person, the photographer, did not take that picture with us in mind. You know, they've got two people standing in front of the structure, or you've got a structure, and if you're really lucky, you got another building in the background. So there are some real issues in reconstructing the physical Deerfield. And so what you got to do is use the geophysics and use the geophysics and the historical documents and the photographs and everything else and descriptions of descendants and a lot of this oral history gives us some clues about what different buildings were used for. Multiple uses over time, some of them were converted into other uses. So it's a complex picture in the history of Deerfield. So what we did this summer was spend just a couple of weeks working at Deerfield. And now it wasn't just blind luck that we found what we found, but it was good science. I keep saying that. So you all know where Deerfield is. One of the things that we do have is a fair amount of aerial photography. Unfortunately, so far we haven't been able to get it past 1948, which is actually pretty good to go back to 1948. But one of the things that O.T. Jackson did when Deerfield began to close down was that in order to kind of make a living, he began to sell a lot of the structures that were abandoned at Deerfield. So a lot of the houses were hauled away or dismantled, and their materials were sold and things like this. So we have a real problem in reconstructing Deerfield as it existed. Because we don't have any real good photographs of the day, aerial photographs, which might tell us something. So you've all seen this before, the plat maps. One of the things that happened that the Deerfield Committee was able to arrange about 2.5–3 years ago was we had a land surveyor go in and resurvey the site and reestablish a lot of the corners of the lots and things like this. So that was very cool. They left the metal stakes in place, and had the identifying stakes on them and everything. So that was good for the archaeologists because we know where lot 13 is, where block 4, where the corners of block 4 and things like that are. So that was very cool, and that's what you see up here on the right. So that really is we've been able to reference what how Deerfield was laid out through some reconstructing it in a modern way. This is an aerial photograph of Deerfield in the lower left of 1949. If you take a look at it, there's not much there. You see the highway and the white line going across at the top. You see just south of the highway, the lunchroom, and some of those structures that have remained in places. As you go down Washington Avenue from that stretch of buildings, maybe I can do that here, you run into the Jackson House. And then this is the store. You know, there's just a bunch of other features. This is that big massive locust with all those nice spines on it that Squire Brockman's house is in the middle of, and it's protected by nature. We actually have some, the aerial photographs are really cool because going from 1949 up to the present, you can actually see that grove of thorny locust expand, just boom, boom, boom. This is very cool. This was taken, it's an aerial photograph. Oh, cool. But it's an oblique aerial photograph, and what it is essentially taken from across the highway, from the north, going down Washington Avenue, and you can see the lunchroom over here. You can see the old filling station over here. Wait a minute, what's going on here? There's a building. There's another building. There are buildings back here. They're not there anymore. So something's going on. We can see a complex in probably about 1954. And this is from a PhD dissertation of Edward Norris, who did this in the Department of Geography at CU back in 1980. So this is cool. If I could find this original photograph, I would kill for it. Unfortunately, I called the Department of Geography and said, could you pull Ed's original PhD dissertation and see if there are original photographs on it? They said, yeah, we got it right here. They're copies. So he must have copied some other photographs from somewhere else and put them in there, but I'd just love to have more detail on this. The other thing is, here's the Jackson house. What's going on here? There's nothing there anymore. So there was a structure there. There was a building. That's where that depression was that Andy was showing you. That that we were getting all this neat spikes and stuff. So on the left, what you see is an aerial photograph with all of these different structures that were surveyed by Karen Waddell for the National Historic Preservation, or the NRHP, the National Historic District or Site. And so you see there's a house here called House in Block 4. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but I'm going to show you the excavations. The lunchroom, which is still in existence, falling down. The filling station, which is still there. Blacksmith shop. This is that enigmatic kind of rectangular stone foundation, concrete foundation, and so forth. So you can see all of these features that are, in the aerial photograph. And what we decided to do was pick out two areas. There's a house in Block 4 which was surveyed and photographed in 1995, 1990, and 1995 as part of the nomination to the National Historic Site. And then we decided to excavate behind the backyard of the Jackson house because we knew that there had been some test units that had been done a few years earlier. So these are the two areas that we looked at. And so there was this great mystery about what was called the Block 4 house, or the house in Block 4. And so we went over there and we excavated. One of the things that we ended up doing was looking at these aerial photographs. And this is a 1949 aerial photograph. And you can see in the red outline, there ain't no house. Wasn't there in 1949. Okay. 1950s, there it is. What does that tell you? Somebody moved that house there. Where did it come from? We haven't found out where it came from, but I have a pretty good idea. I think it was an original Deerfield house that had been moved over. So, 1999, it's still there. Cool. 2009, it ain't there anymore. We've got a mystery. We've got a disappearing house. Now, ghost hunters would love this. Now, here is on the archaeological site form for the site in 1994. Here's the house. Aha, we got a picture. Couple of things. One thing to note. You know what that is? It's bricks, red bricks on the roof. Where's the chimney? It's not there anymore. Somebody has begun to disassemble this guy. They're taking it apart. So that was a cool clue. This is a photograph from the site form in 1994 of the house construction, kind of a little double-walled construction with 2 befores. And there's a neighbor right across the fence line to the southeast, and his name is Bob Oliphant. And Bob came over. They would come over and visit us while we were digging there, and I'm sure they had very strange ideas about what archaeologists do. And he said, you know, we got pictures of that house. Ooh, cool. Can you show me the pictures? So he brought the pictures over. And at that time, he was constructing his house, putting in a modular home in the area, and he knew exactly when that house disappeared. And it was in late 2002, and he said that it basically, you know, they came in and ripped it out. They tore it to pieces. They didn't haul it off. So that was very cool. So what we had to do is find information about archaeologically what happened there. So we're following 2 paths here. We have the photographic evidence, and then we have the archaeological evidence. So this is our students and our volunteers out there digging in the missing house area. And there was actually a submergible well that was right next to the house, and that had been used to bring water to the filling station and the lunchroom in the 1950s when those were active, when they were using them to serve customers coming off of the highway there. So as we began to excavate the house, we got into basically what we thought was where the house had been sitting, right on the ground, no foundations. And we found window glass everywhere. We found nails. We found roofing tar paper. We found shingles. They had just literally ripped that thing apart. And they hadn't burned the wood on site or anything like that. They must have hauled some of it off, but there were bricks and all this stuff. So we know that they demolished that house. And according to the neighbor, he said that he had talked to someone before he had moved there that house had been used to as a residence for people working at the filling station and the lunchroom. So it was, it had been hauled there especially for that purpose. So what did we find there? Well, if it was brought to that location let's say in the 50s, then in the mid-50s when it suddenly emerges in the photographs, then it, what kinds of things would be there? Would be late? Would it be 1955 through when it was demolished, maybe in the 1960s, 70s, something like that? And one of the things that we excavated was this. It's a medicine bottle. It's Schenck's pulmonic syrup, and we know that Schenck's pulmonic syrup was manufactured between 1836 and 1948. We're still kind of matching up what's left of the pattern of it, but it was. We think that this is an earlier Deerfield piece. So that area was occupied. At least there's some debris there that comes from the earlier Deerfield period. The rest of this stuff, we've got chimney stuff, the chimney bricks that were on the roof that are now on the ground, what's left of them. They hauled a lot of those off. We found wallpaper, and we're now in the process of trying to match the wallpaper design. Anybody want to do that for me? Thanks. Historic wallpaper designs, I'm not really an expert on that. I don't know who is. Maybe somebody here who can do that. And then we have roofing nails. So, we've got all this debris and stuff that's going on there. We also excavated in the backyard of O.T. Jackson's house. It was first the Deerfield Lodge. There's some question about whether he was actually living in the lodge early on or whether it was, for visitors to the site when it became the Valley Resort and they were doing dances and all kinds of things on weekends. He certainly moved into it after Deerfield began to decline. And we have a photograph of the early construction of it, and then the Deerfield Lodge, probably about 1923 or so, in the upper right. And this is a Jackson house today. There's George helping with the archaeology in the backyard with one of our students that's here, Noel. And what had happened back in 2003 is that they had brought an archaeologist in to do some really tiny test pits. They would be about 1.5 feet square, and he did about 80 of them all over the place. And most of the test units that were done up and down Washington Avenue in selected places didn't really turn up much of anything. There were a few artifacts. But he had done some test units in the backyard of the O.T. Jackson house, and it looked like that there was stuff there. Not very deep, maybe 1.5 feet deep at the most, and so there was some real possibilities. So we set an excavation unit, see this kind of dark, this black dashed line, and that's where we set up our excavation units. We excavate about a 3-foot squares. Actually, we do metrics, so they're meter squares. And we did several of them in the backyard. And this is an example of one of the test units. We didn't get much deeper than that because we didn't have to go any deeper than that. Once you got down about 1.5 feet, you pretty much began to run out of any kind of archaeological materials. So what we think of as 25 to 30 centimeters, about 1 foot to 1.5 feet deep, that's where the archaeology is. One of the things that we ran into in one of our test units was a post, a wooden post. Very cool. I like wooden posts, and it's still intact. It's been there quite some time, probably at least since Jenny left the place about 30, 40 years ago. We found a trash dump area. There was a trash burner on site, and they had burned a bunch of stuff and then kind of just dumped it on the ground, and it had gotten covered up. There's all kinds of goodies in there. I love the way people do that when they burn their stuff. When I was a kid, that's what we used to do. You know, we didn't have trash service in the countryside. I was on a ranch. And so we would burn it and then dump it out in the back. Go back to my old house in Kansas, my old farm in Kansas, and we can probably find some of evidence of my childhood. We found a .30 caliber bullet, lead bullet. And we found a shell button. Probably the button goes back a little ways. So these are some of the artifacts that I'm going to show you that we found. That we also found bones, so evidence of what they were eating. So we're beginning to get a little information on what they're consuming, you know, what their lifestyle was like, and so forth. So here's some of the things that we found. This is the trash burner, which probably dates fairly late, but doesn't mean that they didn't do trash burning and similar types of thing. It's chicken wire with some steel post around it. You throw your trash in the middle of it, you set it on fire, and then periodically you lift the wire up and you clean it out and you dump it, which is what we found. There was a chicken house and a little livestock yard in the corner. Part of that is still there and partly intact. So you begin to reconstruct that these people are growing chickens and doing eggs and maybe some small animals in the backyard. We were able to establish one of the fence line that was associated with the chicken coop, the corner of it being right here, and the line of it being right here, and another corner post being a little bit further east on the property. And you see our excavation unit over here, and our post hole fits right in line with that. So that was part of that post hole line. And there's the post again, that little stub that's sticking in there. So I suppose if we keep digging over enough, we'll find all those posts in the ground. But these are the things we're finding. These are quite interesting. This is a piece of a dinner plate. On the left, on the far left is the upper side of the dinner plate, and then the bottom side of the dinner plate with a maker's mark on it in the corner. And it turns out to be an English imported dinner plate, fine dinnerware, made by Burgess and Lay of England. And we were able to establish the pattern, which is the Leighton pattern, and we know that it was manufactured between 1912 and 1950, so Deerfield era. We found stoneware, crocks and things that you're pickling things in and storing things in. We found a piece of crock on the left. The little one on the right is just an example of a red-winged crock, stoneware. These were very common at the time. There's a lot of this crockery sherds and things at the site. And then we found a teacup, coffee cup, whatever you want to say, a rim sherd, which is also Burgess and Lay. So we must have had a set of imported dinnerware at this site. So that tells us something about these people. And did they bring it with them from wherever they came from? Does this belong to the Jacksons? Or was it part of the fancy dinnerware for the lodge when the Valley Resort was in play? And they brought it in so that, you know, this is a high-class establishment. You know, we had nice servingware and everything else. So there are lots of things that you can do with this. And then there's the common stuff, some of it fairly late, shotgun shells. Forget that. The 30 caliber bullet, I think the 30 caliber bullet is probably something that could potentially belong to the Deerfield era. And then we find a lot of soft drink stuff, some of it fairly late. This is Hires root beer bottle, Sherd on the left, and then some examples of root beer bottles of that period. Unlike some people in this room, I still remember that. And then the Dr. Pepper Sherd and so forth that has been burned. So, you know, I don't know how much in the way of soft drinks they were consuming, but they were consuming some. Haven't found any wine bottles yet, and I expect to find plenty of that before it's all over. This is a Anchor Hocking canning jar. We were able to take the broken glass, and I'm glad I have students because they can do that. They can, you know, put all this stuff together, glue it together. So we got that partially reconstructed, and that's probably 1950, 1970, so probably sometime in the period of Jenny Jackson inhabiting the house after, maybe after O.T. had died. A pickle jar, again, Anchor Hocking, probably from the same time period. We have a very inexpensive man's ring, which would have some kind of an inset cheap stone that we found. I don't know who that belongs to, but it's the sizing of it indicates that it probably is a man's ring. So you're beginning to get these personalized items that the more and more information you're going to get about them, you can tell more about the people that live there and what their lives were like. And then this is the shell shirt button. It could have been manufactured anywhere between 1910 and 1950, but after that point in time, they began to be replaced by plastic and other types of materials. So, you know, we're getting personalized items and so forth. And these are just some of the folks that are part of the Deerfield group that are supporting this. And by the way, the eats that you have today are paid for by a grant from UNC for the conference. So I thought I might acknowledge them. And I'd like to introduce the next speaker. I don't know this guy. What I'm doing next is it's a relatively short presentation because what I'd like to do is emphasize something about the Deerfield project, and that it is a partnered, collaborative project. And it doesn't mean that earlier Deerfield preservation efforts weren't collaborative and didn't involve a lot of folks. They did. But this one has really spread its wings and is beginning to expand rather dramatically. And it's all part of something that in the 21st century we're beginning to call public and civic engagement. And it's people partnering together, and in lots of ways it sort of reflects the Deerfield community. People coming together for mutual benefit. And that's what's really cool about it. So we're creating a community here, in a sense, around a community that existed a number of years ago. So civic and community engagement, by definition, in my case, coming from the academy, coming from the university, it involves universities and external non-university partners in various ways in things that are mutually beneficial. And it's based on reciprocity. Everybody contributes, everyone gets something of benefit to them out of it working together. And that's, that's one of the good things about, doing community engagement, community working together. It's not just service to one, going from one direction. It goes in multiple directions with multiple benefits. It can involve, and does involve, collaborations of university faculty, students, and staff at the university. Within disciplines, across disciplines, it doesn't make any difference. You could be an English major, you could be a history major, or a history professor, And non-academic groups, anyone who has something in common, someone who really has a burning desire and excitement about something that they want to work with others. Different kinds of organizations, governmental agencies, and it often involves both research and education. So there are a lot of different aspects to it. And for higher education institutions like Colorado State and UNC, it provides opportunities for our students to do hands-on learning and get real-life experience, and for faculty to conduct something that we call engaged scholarship. And engaged scholarship is very cool because we always talk about there being a practical aspect to life and education. And the practical aspect is that, does it make an impact? Does it help society? Does it help us to do things better? And I think universities strive for that a lot. They don't always achieve it, but I think it's really an important goal, particularly in this age. And so, engaged scholarship is based on the idea that major advances tend to occur when human beings consciously work to solve the central problems confronting their society. This is from Ernest Boyer, who's now deceased, who sort of pioneered civic engagement, community engagement, and engaged scholarship many years ago. And I think the important thing about engaged scholarship is that it can and does have a real impact on human lives. And it's not just an education, part of the education process. And so it's a partnered process that has impacts in different ways to different people that are participating in the whole process. It can be personal. You know, I really like doing this. I feel good about doing it. I'm learning something. I'm being enriched. You know, there can be all sorts of different impacts on us as individuals. It can be professional in terms of you know, teaching students to become professionals, to make professional landscape architects, or professors, or city planners, or what, you know, giving them greater grounding and effectiveness in their chosen professions. And it can be communal. You know, we all benefit together from doing this, and that's the spirit of Deerfield. You know, that's how we do things. That's how human beings are supposed to function. In today's society, maybe we sometimes lose track of that. And so the Deerfield Dream Project, you know, it really is centered in the Black American West Museum, because this is where the inspiration started. This is where it came through with Paul Stewart forming the museum. And it always comes back to that museum and that organization. I mean, it can't stray too far, because this is what gave birth to the modern day appreciation of Deerfield. And we know that we have a valuable regional and even a national heritage resource. It represents the opportunity for people from all sorts of situations and professions to work together to learn and preserve lessons of American history and past human endeavor for present and future generations. That's got to be worthwhile. We can't lose track of that. I mean, we talk about a practical life. Well, there's a lot more than just, you know, putting food on the table or getting jobs or something like this. If we shrivel up in our intellects and in our minds and our appreciation of each other, then I don't think that it's worthwhile to do the basic things. Honor our ancestors for their sacrifices in making theirs and all of our lives better and more enriched through past generations and into the future. Wow. You know, if our children can learn those lessons and apply them and live with them into the future, boy, that is really very, very important for us as Americans and as citizens of the world. And learn from our forebears how the human spirit, no matter the circumstances, can overcome life's challenges to achieving self-respect, justice, self-sufficiency in yesterday's and today's and tomorrow's world. Those are the lessons that we can learn from participating in working with Deerfield and working with each other. So there are many, many benefits having to do with what we're attempting to do today. And you've learned just a little bit about how that's taking place. One of the engagements that's taking place right now is that we now have multiple universities working together. That's very cool. Sometimes universities tend to be islands unto themselves. And one of our great partners in this endeavor actually was involved in Deerfield well before UNC was. They were involved in the process of working with Deerfield back in the 1990s. Karen Waddell was started as a student project at Colorado State University. And I'd like to introduce the next and final speakers from Colorado State. Dr. Mark Brown and his crew of renowns. And we've got 3 physical presenters coming up, and they'll tell you what their participation and their contributions to the Deerfield project overall are going to be and are right now.
So again, my name is Mark Brown. I'm on faculty in CSU's Department of Clinical Sciences, and I'm also the director of our Office for Undergraduate Research and Artistry, and now I'm CSU's institutional lead on the Deerfield Dream Project. We just wanted to introduce you to a few of the initiatives that are sort of being spearheaded out of Colorado State University as they relate to the Deerfield Dream Project. So let me briefly introduce you to really the key players involved here. First of all, Amanda Purnell, if you don't mind waving. Amanda's the Associate Director for the Office for Undergraduate Research and Artistry, and she coordinates CSU's Boettcher Scholars Program, which is committed to a long-term endeavor associated with the Deerfield Dream Project. And in fact, we're working with the Boettcher Foundation to secure some funding associated with that endeavor. Phoenix Morningstar is a PhD candidate at CSU. Phoenix has really been the most major player at CSU involved with this project. In addition to being a PhD candidate, he's a graduate advisor in the Office for Undergraduate Research and Artistry. He's also on the board for the Black American West Museum. Likewise, Melissa Edwards is a PhD candidate at CSU. Melissa is our graduate advisor for CSU's Journal for Undergraduate Research. And that journal has committed to providing a special edition on the role of undergraduate researchers on the Deerfield Dream Project. And finally, Erin Renfrew is representing our undergraduate contingency at CSU, and she's going to be presenting one of the projects that our students have been involved with. But quickly, to kind of outline the other projects we've been involved in, we're responsible for the design and maintenance of the Deerfield Dream website, which we have a skeleton for now and is being populated. Again, Melissa and the Journal for Undergraduate Research and Scholarly Excellence will be providing a special edition on the role of undergraduates in the Deerfield Dream Project. We'll be responsible for planning and executing a 5K to be held at the historic site of Deerfield. 1, to help raise awareness about the historic significance of Deerfield, and 2, to help raise funding to go directly to the Black American West Museum to help in their preservation and restoration efforts. 4th project is the documentation and preservation of Deerfield textile artifacts, and Erin will be discussing that here in a minute. And lastly, I understand that CSU is slated to host the next Deerfield conference, and so I'd like to say thanks to Dr. Brunswig and Dr. June for hosting us this year, and we're certainly looking forward to being a part of this next year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Phoenix.
Well, I think the timing of the conference is perfect among a number of reasons, but certainly after Dr. Brunswig's presentation about engagement is especially perfect for us, because our presentation today is a lot about the engagement that we've had with students from CSU and other universities. I've actually been texting throughout the day with some students from the University of Colorado at Denver who are actually at the Black American West Museum today doing tours and finding out other projects that they can help with preservation and making sure that we have some solid forward-thinking students that are going to be taking on the next generation. As we've had a lot of presentations today, we've had a lot of stories, and I guess one way for me to start my part of the presentation is kind of my story of how I got involved with the Black American West Museum and the Deerfield Project, because I think one of the things that I'm really enthusiastic about is making sure that all the work that you guys have brought on and brought from so much work and disparate independent work is eventually we hope that this work will continue on in further generations. So Dr. Brown had called me into his office for various meetings that I ended up dropping in on his office for, and he asked me, would you be interested in helping out some students do a project in Deerfield? And he told me a little bit about it, and I said, sure, let's rock and roll, let's do this, and I'll go see what I can do. And as I learned more about the different people who are involved, and we're all over the room today, I said, you know what, we need to get a little bit more deeper involved if we're going to really have our students get a real aspect of what is going on, what Deerfield was and what Deerfield is, and where things are going in the future. So I said, I'm going to go down to the museum and go visit it and talk to some of the folks down there. And I went down, I met with Terry, and I said, gosh, you guys have a lot to do here. A lot of work is going on, and you guys are working really hard to make it happen. How might I get more involved? And she sort of invited me onto the board, said, well, you should come and check out what our board is doing. And so I had lunch with Dr. Anthony, and he said, well, what are you going to do for the board? And I said, well, I'm kind of young, you know, I've never been on a board. But I said, I'll bring some youthful energy for you. How about that? Is that okay? And he said, I think we could probably use a little bit of that. Not too much, but we'll see how it goes. So it looks like I'm coming out of my rookie season as a board member, and it's time for me to produce a little bit more. So this was a perfect opportunity to bring some of the students that I've been working with over the last almost year now on trying to see how we can get students engaged. And one of the main things that I told Tony I wanted to do, let's see if we can't bring more of the universities more in line and more on board on how can we connect the students' work and what they're doing, just like Bob said, into their academics, so that we can actually help the museum, help Deerfield be known, but also carry that energy on into the next future. So one of the things I'm going to have you guys do, hopefully right now, is stand up with us, and we're actually going to be engaged in what Erin's going to be presenting on today, because she's going to help walk us through some of the items that are over here that you guys have looked at for a little bit. So let's go ahead and stand up if you don't mind, and let's kind of get in close here and get tight, because that's the way most of us end up meeting, I think, as we do our work. We have a Deerfield meeting. There's not 20 or 30 of us. We're in small groups, and it's like a family. So I'd really like, as we start closing this down and we become the last presentation here, is if you guys kind of get in close here and let Erin kind of guide you through what she's got. And I think you'll really enjoy seeing some of the science that goes on behind some of the work that gets done and how these kind of materials get preserved and get stored so that they're there for future generations. So with that, unless I've missed anything, Erin, it's all yours.
Okay, so I'm an undergrad from Colorado State University, as already been mentioned. And as Dr. Brunswick mentioned, there's a lot of collaboration going on this. I'm actually a biochemistry major. So this is not really my department, but it's been great for me to kind of go through this, kind of see how the process of this research works, putting stuff together. And actually, my major partner on this project was Kimberly Hannigan, and she's a PhD student at the University of Colorado, Denver. So bringing yet another university to this. So what we worked on was taking some artifacts that Phoenix brought from the Black American Museum of the West and kind of protecting them, preserving them. A lot of the items don't really have a display at this point. They're in storage. So we took these two, a flag with 48 stars and a World War I jacket that the museum had, and put them in, I guess, more of a safe environment. So just kind of a historical context, most of you are probably very familiar with World War I history, but since it directly applies to Deerfield, I think we had mentioned before that 5 Deerfield men actually served in the war. What this is the United States, the war started in 1914. The United States didn't join until 1917. At the time, as the War Department was preparing to send troops off, they realized that they only had an army of 126,000 people. That wasn't going to fly for a major endeavor overseas, so they started trying to figure out ways that they could increase the numbers. At that point, it was all volunteer, but they wanted to increase as quickly as they could, so the Selective Service Act was passed. It required men between ages 21 and 31 to register for the draft. Now these are 2 draft cards. You can see that there's a slight difference in that the corner is torn off. The reason being that men of color, when they registered for the draft, were asked to tear off the corner of their card so that they could be easily identified. Up until this point, there were only 4 Army regiments of colored men, dating back to the Civil War. The Army actually had to stop accepting black volunteers within a week after the war started because they had their quotas filled. However, when the draft rolled around, this changed. Black men were actually only 10% of the population, but accounted for 13% of draftees. So during the war, most black men served in more of a labor capacity. They were digging trenches, they were bringing supplies, they were doing very necessary jobs. But that's, after outrage from the African American communities, 2 combat battalions were created. So they were the 92nd and 93rd Infantry, and these are the patches. The first one is what we actually have in the jacket we have today. That's from the 92nd Division. They were also known as the Buffalo Division. So Buffalo soldiers continued through World War I and World War II as a mostly black division until they were integrated. I'm not sure at what point. But in this patch is from the 93rd Division, which fought mostly with the French Army, where they came to be known as the Blue Helmets. So you have a blue helmet there. Okay, so black men fought bravely in the war, served in many capacities. When they came back, they wanted to be hailed as heroes. But they actually came back to a climate of increased racial tensions. During the summer of 1919, in the fall, there were race riots in 26 cities across the United States. So they didn't get quite the reception that they desired. This particular picture, the owner of our jacket, Daniel Henry Cooper, was in the 331st Artillery, which was part of the 92nd Infantry. And this is actually his unit on the way back, from World War I, aboard the transport, the Louisville. So I don't know if he's actually in this picture, but this is his unit. Okay, so kind of putting this all in a more Colorado historical context, what was going on as this whole thing was heating up? The Battle of Ludlow in southern Colorado, where miners struck and tensions heated up with the local militia, ending in deaths of several men, women, and children. Rocky Mountain National Park was founded in 1950. There was the construction of the Pikes Peak Highway in 1916. Colorado adopted prohibition right before we sent these men off to war. And then, of course, we enter World War I. And then, kind of in a more economical sense, as soon as these people were coming back, there was the first gasoline tax. So cars are actually becoming a bigger part, I guess. So this is our World War I jacket. If you have not had a chance, please go look at it. It's in its box right now, but yeah. So this is Daniel Henry Cooper in his uniform. As you can see, the uniform is faded considerably. Part of our goal is to stop damage like that. But he is the one that owned this uniform. I don't know what year this was taken. Here is his enlistment record, which was my primary source for most of the information I pulled off. This is not a very good scan, so it's a little bit hard to read. But he just says that he was part of the 331st Field Artillery. He served in the Marboche sector of Lorraine, France. And that was his unit's major action. He was not wounded in action. And he came back at the age of 27, still unmarried. And this is his honorable discharge papers. Okay, so there are the decorations on the jacket. There's a patch, I think it's on the right shoulder, of Veterans of Foreign Legions. This pin and the patch, if you look close, they're in the same shape, and the pin says the same thing. This is past post commander. I was not able to find where he may have commanded a post, but yeah, that's on there. And then here's the patch I was mentioning earlier, the Buffalo Division patch. Okay, that brings me to our next item, the flag with 48 stars. We're not even sure what this is made out of. We really don't have much information. We're still working with the museum to kind of figure out where this came from. But flag with 48 stars was in use between 1912 and 1959. The stars were added for New Mexico and Arizona in 1912. And this was used all the way up to when the star for Alaska was added. But as you know, if you can notice, the stars are arranged in six rows of 8, very evenly. If you look now on a 50-star flag, there's 9 rows, and they switch between 6 and 5, and they're offset. So the stars are more staggered if you look at a flag today. So this is just this one. Okay. So now for probably the more interesting part that most people don't know very much about is the actual preservation of the artifacts. So when you get a textile, the first thing that you want to do is identify the fabric that's made out of. Plant-based textiles like flax or cotton are mostly have cellulose in them, not a whole lot of proteins. So they react differently to chemicals than wool does, which is mostly keratin based. So why you need to kind of do these first steps? You want your box to be the right size. You want to have about 1 inch around each side so that the textile itself is not in contact with the edges of the box. You want to avoid adverse chemical reactions, so knowing what kind of material your box is made out of is important. And you want to know what kind of damage your item is especially susceptible to, like wool, because keratin has a lot of amino acids that contain sulfur. Bugs are really attracted to wool, so you're more likely to get a bug infestation. So the next thing is finding those materials. Because we have wool in our textile, in our jacket, we know that it's sensitive to bases as well as acids. So we want to make sure that we get materials that don't have these chemicals in them. So our boxes are special storage boxes for textiles, but they have this buffer in here, which is basic. So we have to make sure we put unbuffered paper in between the item and the box. And then it always stays in between, because otherwise there will be increased degradation in any portion of the textile that's contacting the box. The flag, as I mentioned before, we don't know what it is. So whenever you're not sure what material your item is made out of, you want to use unbuffered materials in direct contact. So that's what our tissue paper is, unbuffered. Okay, the other thing that's interesting that I learned from Kimberly as she was going through this process is that because most textiles are made out of natural fibers like furs or plant materials are short, and when you make a thread, you spin a bunch of short fibers into a thread. That doesn't matter in most day-to-day use, but when something is folded for long periods of time, the short fibers will shift around that crease and form a hole, just from the natural way that they lie. And so the idea, if you can see right here, is to build basically a human to go inside the jacket, mostly in this case, to kind of support the fabric so it doesn't develop holes as quickly. And we made this out of natural muslin and acid-free batting to, once again, try to keep this away from harmful chemicals. And and so the flag was also difficult in some way because it has this pole. When you put an item in a box, as mentioned, you don't want it really touching the edges. So having it shift around is really not ideal. So, and we're going to pull this away, and hopefully you guys will get a chance to look at this more closely. Kimberly built basically a trench to put the flagpole in, so that the flag, when it's put in the box, doesn't shift around when the box is being carried or moved, or whatever you might need to do with it. She also tied this down with natural muslin, as you can see in the bottom picture, and so it keeps the flag from moving around, from getting creased, from getting in contact with the edges of the box. Basically, it keeps it safe. And then, okay, so the final step, you have your items in their preservation cases. Now you want to store them at an ideal temperature, humidity, and light intensity. So temperature, if it's too hot or cold, can cause what's called tendering. Basically, the fibers get really brittle and the artifact can come apart. Humidity increases the growth of mold, bacteria, bugs, whatever. You want to just basically keep that away from your organic fibers because they're susceptible to that. Light intensity, some dyes used in older fabrics will actually turn to acid under light. So it's a good idea to kind of try to keep those away. These particular ones are fine with light, but you want to keep a watch out for that. And then ultraviolet just breaks down dyes and fibers. So that's basically what we did, what you need to think about when we're preserving these items. Hopefully we get a chance to work with more items from the Black American Museum of the West. Unfortunately, these are textiles that will eventually decay no matter what we do to them, but our goal is to just keep them around for as long as possible so as many people can experience this history as possible, which is our goal of the Deerfield Project. So, yes?
Did you take photographs?
I did,
Those?
yes. Yep, that's what most of those are.
We're so glad you're asking questions. If you don't mind, if we can go ahead and shift on over
Yeah,
so you guys
you
can get
would
a
like to
closer
look at
look. As Bob said, one of our big goals is to have that community interaction for all the work that we do. So as you guys come in and you ask Aaron or myself questions, you are engaging in the research that we're doing. Those will be questions even if we have to say, we don't know. Guess what? We're going to go try to find out. So don't be shy. Come on over. There's almost enough room for everybody. And I guess this is a good time as any to go ahead and re-announce as well. Next year we'll be holding this symposium again at Colorado State University. So if you're interested in helping take the load off and becoming part of the steering committee, I think Dr. Brunswick and his crew did a really great job in the Deerfield Committee. So it'll be a nice change of the guard to have some of the volunteers that we've already got. So if you're looking for a spot, you better hurry because we've already got 5 people on our steering committee for next year.
A lot of times it's work.
These are not they also use cotton gloves in most settings, but university preserve textile. Okay. And so now they're moving for textile. That's why you don't ever want to touch it.
Great job on Jimmy Baker's project. They're not.
Oh my goodness. 6:30 and then the other
Not a bad idea. It's interesting to see with
Good. I haven't been reporting very well, but it's been rolling. So actually, this time I told you to get rid of just so she did a big discount. I'm not kidding. It was the red line. It's open.
as far as I know.